Today we're going to talk about improving the customer experience through Agile Innovation. Now I powered through this. It could probably take 20 minutes. So this is our conference. It's just questions, comments. People want to talk to each other about stuff. I'm open to that. I'm going to try to see if we can get through the material, obviously. But again, this is meant to be interactive for sure, because that's when you're actually learning. If you wait to the end, you probably forget your question or you're not engaged at all. So make a statement. Most companies are really bad at improving the customer experience. I mean, you see this probably in your everyday life. You step on an airline, call your wireless carrier, or even, I was trying to use PowerPoint here to get this thing projected. It's struggling. Right? It's all around us. We see it all the time. If you just open your eyes, you realize that. But what happens to these companies is that manifests itself as a growth challenge. So I do consulting in this. A lot of the clients will come to me and they'll say, we have the product in the market. How do we get more people to use our product? Or, geez, how do we get our customers to stop switching from our product to our competitors? And I usually say, well, you put a gun to their head and that'll stop them, but then you go to jail and that's the end of that. So really that's the wrong perspective. It's the wrong questions. And as a result, companies really focus on the wrong things because of those questions. Now, most people at this conference are product managers, maybe marketing too. So you guys are busy out there developing product roadmaps, right? Building new features, trying to do executing marketing campaigns. But just because you're doing all these activities, you're busy doing what you think are the right things, doesn't mean you're going to create a great customer experience. It really takes more than that. And without the right inputs to drive what you're doing, you're aiming in the dark. And I pick on Microsoft a lot. They were actually a client. I probably did a dozen projects for them over the years. Not the best of clients because they don't listen to your insights. But if you think about Office, this product has been around for decades. I started using it in college. And they've added features and features over the years. But does that mean it's become a better customer experience? If people here even still use it, I know a lot of people will switch to other solutions. You probably would say no, right? In fact, I was cursing it, as I said a little earlier, just trying to get PowerPoint to show up on the screen. So really, the truth is, to drive growth in a business, to improve your customer experience, you have to know when to stop adding features and when to focus on what the customer really needs. And I know that sounds kind of trivial, but most companies don't do that or don't do that well. What do? Well, this is actually, if anyone here uses Net Promoter in their companies, is that a common? It's become pretty widespread over the years now. So they've turned to this as a means or a way to monitor how they're doing as far as their customer experience. If you don't use it, you've probably seen one of these at least from a company, right? They send out a survey, it has a single question asking your willingness to recommend, and then a big box asking why. And really, this is ground zero for where things go off track when it comes to improving the customer experience. So what do I mean? Well, again, that question up there, that's pretty simple and straightforward. But this big box that you're left staring at, asking why, is a really important input. In fact, most people would say, if you're an organization, that why is at least as important, maybe more important than the score you get. People talk about, I have a 7 or an 8. That's not really what's behind it. It's really understanding why that is, what's struggling with customers when they're giving you feedback. So what do companies do? Well, they try to make use of it by categorizing that input, right? So they'll actually have people out there or software that'll try to categorize its comments as quickly as they can to make sense of it. In fact, this has actually become a big business. There's a lot of companies that'll parse language, or you can outsource to India and have someone read it and try to make use of it to do just that. Now the problem with that approach, and I call it the blah blah box, right? So, is that in addition to it taking a lot of time, a lot of effort, it's also open to a large degree of interpretation. How do you group these comments? But the bigger issue, the real issue, is that customers will give you vague, muddled inputs. They'll say things like, hey, I wish your solution were a little easier to use, or a little more robust, or I didn't like the color. Or maybe they'll say, hey, I love you guys, and then give you a score of 0 or something low. And actually, a banking client of mine was using this tool, and they were trying to get feedback on their customer service. And the head of customer service, I was talking to her, and she was really disgruntled. And I said, well, what's wrong? She said, well, my pay is tied to this. It's really important that I have a high net promoter score. And I said, well, what's driving that? And she said, the #1 reason why customers are not happy with their call center is not the quality of the reps or how long it takes to get a hold of a human. It's the location and hours of the branches. Right? It has nothing to do with the call center. And that was what her frustration was. And that's the thing. Customers really speak in a language that's convenient for them, but it actually often proves useless for really understanding what they want, what's behind that, and how to improve the experience. And they don't really know the best solutions, and so actually their comments can lead you astray. I know Steve Jobs most famously said, we don't go talk to customers about their problems because they can't tell you. Well, what he was saying is they can't tell you what solution they want. They're not experts in that. They'll just give you whatever you think you want to hear, or maybe they'll make something up, or somewhere in between. So unfortunately, really just asking why isn't sufficient. It's really what questions you go out and ask your customers, and then what inputs you capture that make the difference in improving your customer experience. The other thing is, a lot of companies have adopted customer development, lean startup principles. Anyone here, company do that? Customer development stuff? Take a concept, yeah? Trying to.
Got to find the customers.
Okay. That's actually a challenge too, man. And most of the thinking around this is you have an idea, concept, solution, and you go out there into the market, try to iterate, test it, fail fast, right, is a common term that's been thrown around. It's actually no wonder that most new products fail. This is a little bit of a backward approach from my perspective. In fact, I learned this the hard way. I was a product manager at Intuit about 15 years ago now, just in the building right over there, and they said, we need to build a new version of TurboTax for millennials coming out of college. They weren't using TurboTax, they're still using mom and dad's CPA. And so I said, okay, good. I was pretty new to product management at the time. And I said, I don't know, let me figure out how to do this. And my manager luckily said, go find the best process in the world for doing this. And so I went out and looked and tried to find a methodology. But at the same time, I had to follow sort of the way it was done at Intuit, which was, they didn't call it design thinking, but it was sort of that. So we hired this consultant, and I remember we brainstormed 250 concepts, had them all on the walls in a room like this. And I remember this consultant we had hired to lead this 2-day brainstorming session. I said to her, hey, how do I pick which idea to move forward with? Like, what do I do? And she kind of just shrugged and said, good luck, and she took off. So I realized there was a challenge ahead of me, and said, instead of wasting a bunch of time trying to test these ideas and throwing them out there, and Intuit has deep pockets, so maybe I wouldn't run out of cash. If you're an entrepreneur, that's a real problem. What I did was I actually hired a company to go out and really identify the problem in a deep way. And then within a matter of days, we were able to take concepts that we already had floating around on the walls, put them together, and actually come up with this concept that we got written up in the Wall Street Journal and Business Week. We brought 10,000 new customers into Intuit in the first year, which for Intuit it's not huge, but for a startup that's pretty good. And I got actually a patent around this idea. And it wasn't like I was some brilliant person. I just sort of had the right inputs. And so this is what I'm going to propose today to you to actually improve the customer experience, drive your NPS score at your organization. First, we don't start there. What we do is we start with interviewing the customer, mapping their journey, and gathering their needs. So I'll talk about what that looks like. Then, once we understand that, we can pinpoint where the pain is. What is in the market? What is the problem or challenge? And then we can think about how do we solve this? How do we come up with solutions that actually address those? And this is what I call Agile Innovation. That's why I talk about improving the customer experience through Agile Innovation. So I'm not actually necessarily talking about Agile development. So if you guys came for that, you want to walk out. It's actually more about improving the customer experience.
Excuse me, what's an NPS driver?
So I'll talk about that. But what drives your Net Promoter Score?
Okay,
what are the
sorry.
drivers?
Just didn't recognize that.
Yeah. And if I don't address it later, bring it back up and we can talk more about it. Yes?
Oh, just by the way, just to let you know, a lot of people were backlogged at the food trucks.
I heard that.
So we're sorry to be walking in.
Nice.
Sorry about that.
Especially with food.
Yeah. I know, I didn't even bother trying to get in line. I wouldn't even made it. You guys were just staring at the screen. So that's okay. I know, I understand. Don't worry. So let's start with gathering customer needs. I'm guessing most of you here probably think, well, we do that, right, in our organization. We go out and talk to customers. We gather the needs. But I'm gonna challenge it. I think it may be a little different than what we're talking about here. So again, at the introduction for those who are coming in, if you have questions, comments, open it up. I'm definitely open to this. My goal here is not just to power through a PowerPoint, but to have discussion too. So what do we gather? So what is different? Well, so first thing, what we don't do. We don't sit around inside an organization and pretend like we understand the customer or their journey, right, without actually going and talking to them. And people a lot of times will chuckle at this slide, but this is actually really what happens. Maybe it doesn't look like this, right? But it's, right, it's the, when I was into it, it was Scott Cook, the founder, who's a really smart person, saying, we need to create a product that does this. And of course, because he's the founder and the chairman and everyone kind of bows to him, everyone runs and does that, right, without actually asking the question, well, is that really what we should be doing? I actually did that in one product, and I was told to shut up, literally. So. And in fact, I had a client, TD Bank, this is what they were doing. They were trying to figure out how to drive deposit growth at their bank, and they were inside the company thinking of really deposit products, right, without even going out and trying to understand the customer needs in a meaningful way. So instead, what we do is, well, what I recommend you do is put on the lens of the customer and define the journey they're going through as the job they're trying to get done. Now, I'm throwing out this term job. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of jobs to be done. Is that familiar? A few people? It's starting to gain more ground. Just a really quick history of it, to be brief. A job is a task, an activity, a goal. It's something you're trying to achieve. And this thinking's been around since really the 70s. Peter Drucker, Theodore Levitt, a Harvard Business School guy, wrote about it. And they used to say, people don't want to buy your product or service as much as you think they do. They want to get something done, right? So they're hiring or using your product to solve something. So example, some of you are taking notes, right? So you're hiring maybe a pen and paper to capture information in a meeting, in a conference. Or maybe you have a recorder or a camera, all different solutions to that job. And the truth is people are not, well, I'll talk about this, but the job is really what you're trying to get done. So when there's a product or service that comes along, it helps you get the job done better. That's when you'll switch. And the other reason that we look at it from a jobs to be done perspective is that we want to map the journey from the customer's perspective, not from how we see it. So I don't know how many times I've seen journey maps in organizations that'll say one of the first steps will be onboarding. Well, I can tell you no customer wants to onboard. That's what you're doing. Right? That's an inside-out view of what they're doing. It's how the organization sees it. It's not how the customer sees it. And so we want to make sure we see it as the customer sees it, and we want to also have an end-to-end view of all the steps in between. So very often our product or service is one little slice or a part of this overall job that they're trying to get done. And in fact, a lot of innovation occurs realizing that there's stuff they're doing way before they use your product and after as well that you just totally ignore or miss, don't even think about. You just kind of leave it on them to actually do, and then they use your product there in the middle. And I mentioned this briefly. So customers are loyal to the job they want to get done, not our product or service. And in fact, solutions actually are a point in time. They come and go. But the job is typically very stable. The job doesn't change much, and that's one of the powers of this. So customers will switch, as I mentioned, solution when a new one comes along that helps them get it done better. So taking notes, capturing information, well, Moses did that on Mount Sinai, right? The Ten Commandments. And a chisel and a stone, whether you believe the story or not. But, right, and then, that's hard to carry, and then over time, it's all paper, and blah, 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 and now all these other advanced ways to do it. So people will switch to a solution. No one uses a stone tablet, a chisel, I don't see. Another example, just to kind of drive home the point, is listening to recorded music. So a few examples, solutions that have existed, right? We have records, tapes, CDs, 8 tracks somewhere in there. Skip over that. MP3, now we're really into streaming, and who knows what's going to be next. These solutions are coming on, but the truth is the job of listening to recorded music, actually purchasing, listening to it, organizing, and even sharing it, has been a job people have been doing since they had started actually even listening to live music. People wanted to capture the music and listen to it later. So it's a job that's been around for probably centuries. The solutions, didn't start evolving until more recently, and they've evolved faster, quicker. Well, what's amazing is when I think about this is that there was a bunch of record manufacturers in the 40s and 50s. They were pretty big companies, right? Not one of them really saw themselves as helping people get this job done. They didn't turn their their solution, they didn't keep up with new technology as evolved and turn their solution into a better solution. They just saw themselves as record manufacturers. That's it. So they stopped. Now there's a little bit of a comeback because there's the vintage vinyl people want, but that's a different job. There's actually an emotional thing they're trying to do. When it comes to listening to recorded music, predominantly people are here, right? They're in the end using those two. And really, the truth is, the most successful organizations in the world, the ones that are the 100-year companies, if you've ever heard that term, they're the ones who get this. They're the ones who change and follow the job. And there's not a lot of them that do that, right? Some people ask me what's a good example. Like one that comes to mind a lot is IBM. I mean, they've changed what they don't see. They saw them. They were writing and creating typewriters, and they moved to these massive mainframes and then smaller. Now they don't even do computers at all, right? They're actually helping with people helping implement it and combine it and service it. So they see themselves helping people get a job done, and they've migrated over time. And sometimes, just getting rid of stuff that they see is no longer core to what they're trying to do. So I'm going to walk through an example of actual client to kind of show you how this makes this more tangible. But I'll say, is there any questions at this point? That's actually a good point. The difference of here, maybe I should have made it clearer, so that's a good, is that we're not trying to use our product or service as the lens of which we're studying the customer, which is what most people do. So the lean startup thing is about you have a hypothesis for an idea, or it's an idea, right? And now you're iterating and talking to customers about that, about how to improve that. What we're actually trying to do is, let's face it, as entrepreneurs or companies, we already have products. So what we're trying to do is really step away from that, at least initially, and really frame up the job the customer wants to get done around, that's germane to your solution. So I actually ignore the solution when I do this kind of work for my clients. I'll show the example here in a minute. And I ignore it, and I study that in a way to understanding really what are they trying to get done when they're doing this job. Then I come back to the solution my client does and say, okay, here's our idea or our product, here's what the customer wants to do, or here's what they're struggling to do. What do we need to change in our product and sort of features and functionality to help them do that better? Instead of thinking about like how do we get more from the user part, it's like how do we change what we're doing? So the difference is we're not starting with the product as unit of analysis, we're actually starting with the job. I think that customer development or lean startup, those tools actually come, or even design thinking, come after this. Like I would say you would do this work first to really understand the need, and then, because you still need to come up with this great solution, so the customer development's about very quickly doing that iterative. But the idea is that if you know the problem you're trying to solve and now you're iterating around the solution, most people, the problem is they jump right, they don't actually spend much time in the problem. They move right into iterating on the solution, and then they're, well, is this a good idea? Well, we're not. So they iterate on the problem and the solution. They're actually two variables changing at the same time. So they struggle with this. So I would argue actually this process here is more of a front end to that, and it'll actually make customer development and start much more efficient and less wasteful, really, because you're not iterating, you're still trying to figure out the best idea, but you have a problem you're trying to solve. Now it's how do we do it? And by the way, you might say, we can't solve it today. This is not in a way that's technically feasible, but at least now you've made a strategic decision. So just to help illustrate, a client I work with, who they wanted to study car dealerships in Canada and identify opportunities really to improve automotive CRM tools. So they sell CRM software to dealerships. Dealerships are obviously a big user of those tools to drive sales and marketing. And most people would think about, a dealership, perhaps they'd start with Canadian dealerships as a market. But one of the first things we do is we try to break that down, because a dealership's not a market, right? There's actually not one constituent doing something in a dealership, right? There's a bunch of people in a dealership trying to get different jobs done. And so, for example, consumers are part of that, right? They have to, when it comes to dealerships, you're leasing or buying a car. You have marketing managers who are trying to drive traffic to the dealership by running marketing campaigns. Then you have the sales people who are trying to get you to buy their car, right? Provide those cars for sale. Finance managers who have to provide financing, so on. Dealership's a good example because most of us can relate to that. You walk to a dealership with a lot of people doing a lot of different things, and they all overlap. So really, you have to really define who you're trying to add value for in this ecosystem and what job that you're going to study. That's the first step to really framing this up. And this is one of the first mistakes I see people make is they define it as the dealership, or as I'm selling to mid-market, or I'm selling to small business, right? It's like, well, those are entities, firms. Those aren't people. Like, why? What's the problem that, mid-market's not a person that has a problem. It's just a size of a company. Like that, you know what I mean? That's the first thinking, and that's one of the challenges. So for this project, we actually focused on marketing managers, new and used, car sales managers, and finance managers, because they're all users of the CRM tool. And so sometimes you do have to study more than one set of customers. The question I get asked a lot is like, well, we sell to B2B. Anyone B2B here? Is that a count? You got a couple? Right? And so there's users of your product per se, and then there's also the purchasers, people who make a purchasing decision. They have two different sets of needs. The users have a set of needs of what job they're trying to get done, usually literally the job they're paid to do. And then the decision makers are trying to acquire, purchase a product that helps them, and they have ROI in mind. So it's a different set of needs. So you actually often have to study both. And the inputs in that can drive different things. So the users will drive features and functionality, and understanding the purchase decision-making process can drive your marketing and sales activity. So a lot of times you do have to study more than one. As we sat here, I studied 4, but for purposes of keeping this brief, otherwise we'd be here for hours, we'll just talk about marketing managers to see what the results look like. So again, we start with going out, talking to the customers, of course, like everyone says we do that. But we're talking to people now, not necessarily are using our product, they could be using our product, but we're talking to people who are trying to get the job done that we're interested in adding value to and solving. So CRM tool is a component of, or a piece of, helping to marketing managers to do a marketing campaign. So we went out and talked to marketing managers conducting a marketing campaign. So literally that is their job, right, and what they get paid to do, but also the job they want to do.
But at this point, you're not talking to them about the software that you're trying to sell.
Correct. We're not talking about the software at all, actually, the CRM tool or otherwise. So just a little more background to kind of frame this up. So we, as I've said, we're focused on the job that they want to get done, not our product and service, so that was good framing. And our goal is to understand their measures of success in getting that job done. How do they measure success? Independently now of our product, or any product for that matter. And we know that they want to get the steps of a job done really quickly, predictably, and efficiently. I mean, if you think about anything you want to get done, you're trying to get done quickly, predictably, and efficiently. So as we talk to these people, they don't have to be experts in our solution because they're experts in doing the job. Right? You're talking to people who have done this job over and over. And even in consumers, from a consumer perspective, like I've done a lot of consumer studies talking about the job of buying a car. You may say, well, I don't do that over and over, but you still are an expert in that you have criteria as you go through that job of buying a car that you're trying to satisfy. And so you can articulate these things. You don't talk about solutions. We go out and understand how they measure success. That's what we capture when we do interviews. Those are the needs. And believe it or not, there's actually not a lot of agreement in a lot of my companies of what even a need is. It sounds funny. Because people, I've heard this, they'll say, yeah, we've studied the needs, and what they need is a green button on the screen, or they need a CRM tool that does blah. Those aren't needs, those are solutions hidden in these needs that we as product managers or product owners or marketing have our lens that we see the world through because we're humans, we're biased, right? So we see the world through our product, and we need to do this to our product. So we think about needs in terms of the product. Right? So part of that is stepping away, as I've said, away from that and trying to see the world through their lens. So it's a shift from their perspective. And how do they measure success in getting that done?
Can you give an example of information that you've received from the customer, how you communicated it back to your teams in order to change the product?
Yeah, I'm gonna give more example about like how I turn this input into action. But this one, it sticks in my mind. I did a project for a company that does they do mortgages and title insurance, and we went out and they typically didn't. They actually help banks. They're like an outside part of the bank. They didn't really talk to consumers, so they decided when they want to understand the needs of consumers who are getting a mortgage to buy a home. And one of the things that came up was that the consumers, as they're going through this process, as they have questions, they don't even know who to contact because there's so many. If you've ever got a mortgage, right, you have a loan officer, and you have a processor, and then there's underwriting, and then all these people, and then there's title people call you an escrow. Like, I don't know who to call. So they literally had no idea who to call. So the company's like, well, of course we know who does what, right? We're experts in this. Yeah. Well, the consumer had no idea. And that was a need. It was like, I determined who to call when I have a question about some aspect of this process. And yeah, I remember the president of this division he was like slamming his fist. He's like, that's ridiculous. And we're like, wait, you don't understand. This is what the customer's saying. They are struggling. So we said, all right, let's just try this. So they actually came out with they have a welcome kit they send out anyway. So they just tried a little cheat sheet where they made a list. If you have a question about this, call. If you have a question about that, call. And literally they did that and a couple other things, and their net promoter score went up 20 points within 6 months. So the solution was almost trivial once they understood what the customer problem was. But they never saw it in that perspective.
Interesting. Yeah, someone from HP told me that they changed the name of their business units because they realized customers didn't even understand what that business unit did. So they actually changed the name. So it's amazing how giant companies can go that far down the rabbit hole without realizing these things.
Right.
So
because again, I mean, we're all humans. We see the world through our lens. We're shaped by our experiences, right? Everyone's probably seen that old woman, new woman, picture. What do you see? We see the world through our lens. So that's how, as the CEO of Intuit, I like to. He used to say, if you're successful in your job, you start out maybe as an entrepreneur and you're really in touch maybe with the customer if you're good, right? And then as you grow, it's like putting layers of sweaters on. You get less and less in touch with the environment, what's going on, until you're a CEO of a big company. You're totally isolated, and so but you have still the same view of the world that hasn't evolved, and so you lose touch. And so sometimes you really need to just break away from that. So here's the example of the job that marketing managers are trying to get done when managing a marketing campaign. And so what we do is we actually do interviews. It doesn't, by the way, require hundreds of interviews or anything like that, right? What we do is we actually go out and talk to typically about 5 to 7 customers. Again, people doing the job, right? They have expertise in the job. And what we're not doing is mapping what they're doing today. It's not a process map. I'm sure a lot of organizations have done process mapping. What we're trying to do is understand what they're trying to get done. It's the ideal state. What must you do to be successful? And literally, those are some of the questions asked. What must you do? What are you trying to do as you go through this process? And just to kind of go through this quickly, if anyone's a marketing manager in the room, this should resonate. Right? 3 phases you have to move through to be successful. First, when planning the campaign, you have to establish objectives, choose a target audience, compare your product or service to the competition for positioning, right? And then come up with your positioning, and then you really go into the campaign developing it, selecting developing message and content, selecting channels, right, and making sure everything's ready to launch, and then launching. So there's, you can see there's a lot. If anyone's a marketing manager, there's a lot you're doing before you ever even get that thing out in the field. If you're doing it right. So here you implement it, you launch it. For a dealership, they have to manage leads because that's the goal of that. They're monitoring how they're doing and making modifications, and then concluding it. Maybe the conclusion is the end of a campaign, or maybe the campaign goes on and they just iterate. Like in automotive dealerships, they run campaigns monthly. So really, the end is the end of the month, and then they start over. Is kind of how they do it. And so just to give you an example of some needs that we got. So the first step we do is we map this job from their perspective. And we make sure we have a view, this end-to-end view of what's involved. So if you think about a CRM tool, if you go back to this, the CRM tool maybe helps with a couple of these things like lead gen, and maybe you have some data in there. It's not really actually helping with a lot of the other stuff. So you can say, well, this is where companies would already fall short. They would just say, well, how do people get leads, and how do they manage leads, and let's just make our tool better. But maybe the opportunity is not in this bucket. Maybe it's more, and in fact, I know from the study, there's actually much more opportunity in figuring out how you're doing, monitoring performance. That's actually really complex because of the proliferation of online, offline, and data's in different buckets. And so really, this, just having names in a database is almost not a big deal anymore. But if you focus on the CRM tool and asking about that, you're really iterating around here. Maybe you kind of go a little bit broader than that, but you may miss things that are totally on the other parts of the job that still your customer has to get done. So just to give you an example, so we do 5 to 7 interviews, not a lot. We're talking to people doing the job. We map it out, make sure we have it. It acts like an outline. If you remember from English and back in the day, right, you write an outline before you write your paper, so you make sure you kind of know where you're going. And then each of the steps of the job has measures of success, which I've been talking about, in getting that step done. Right? So again, we're capturing these through interviews with the customers. And by the way, at the end of this I do have slides I can email out about questions you can ask and some templates about how to do this. So if you're interested, maybe just give me your business card and I'll email it out, in the next few days. So you can actually start using this, as I think I said in my pitch on Monday morning. Start capturing these. Because I do want you guys to start using it. And in fact, every step along the journey of doing this will make your product better. Even thinking in terms of job, what job is the customer doing will actually help you make a better product. Even if you don't go through this process. I've worked with entrepreneurs, and even that thinking actually changes their paradigm. Mapping the job even better, and then each step of it along the way, what are they trying to get done? So the way to think about this is that these are all the things that marketing managers are trying to get done that really enables them, in this case, to successfully establish objectives for a marketing campaign. So just to give you a couple other examples, for the step here of developing messaging and content for the campaign, we identified 8 needs. So here again, all the things they need to get done as they develop messaging and content. Now, as a marketing manager, they may actually hire a copy manager to do that, right? To actually do that, or they may do it themselves. But from that perspective, a copy manager is a solution. So they still have the needs of trying to do it. In this case, now they've hired this copy manager, right? Literally hired in the job, or even outsourced it. That's the solution. But the needs themselves are still their needs in doing this well. And then for the last step, just to give another example, we identified 6 activities when concluding a marketing campaign. So we actually, across these 13 steps in this job, captured 106 needs. Right? There's a lot involved with this job. It's pretty deep. A lot of people say we go out and talk to customers, we capture needs, and they have 5 or 10 things they at a high level. But that's not what we're trying to do here. We want to go through in a very granular way. We want to make sure we map the job, all the steps from beginning to end, even beyond our product, as I've hopefully I've said that a couple times. And we want to make sure we capture their needs along that entire journey. Again, even if our product doesn't do that, we want to know, is that an unmet need? I had a client that was selling a service, and it actually literally only addressed one need of like 100 needs that we studied for that market. They did one, and they're like, we don't even do that one well. So, and then here's what's cool. Because our definition now of needs is independent of solutions, these needs are going to remain stable over time. I hear a lot of times people are like, we got to go quickly, the needs are going to change. The needs don't change. The solutions change, right? Especially in a rapidly evolving industry with a lot of competition. The needs that, and I'll talk in a minute about the needs that are, the satisfaction of the needs can change, but the needs themselves are stable. Anyone that's a marketing manager, these needs actually are the same needs as long as there's been marketing managers doing marketing campaigns. And in fact, this study actually I think I did about 4 or 5 years ago. But here's what's cool about this. If you're a company with a product and you do this process, you build a product, you can actually use these needs in the future and say, how are we doing? Or how's the competition doing over time as your solutions evolve? Are the needs the same needs that were unmet before? Are they now met? Have other needs now been unmet? And an example in the healthcare industry, I did a study on consumers going out and getting healthcare. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I think the biggest deal was really just adhering to the doctor's prescription, like getting the prescription, taking it, keep taking the medication. That was one of the biggest challenges because people forget, or some people don't have enough money. What happened? I studied this job again 5 years later, right after the whole Obamacare and then a lot of the debate. So it raised the kind of national attention of people around cost. Plus, insurance companies are pushing cost to us. It was amazing. You could see it in the data and the jobs, how the elements of cost, figuring out how much things cost and what will my insurance pay for, became a much bigger deal later on. Actually, a bigger deal than it was in the past. So this static, stable view of the world is really powerful because you can measure at different points in time what's happening in your industry or an industry you want to get into. So with this really granular view, it's like almost going through the market with a fine-tooth comb. We're now armed with a much better way to identify opportunity in the market. So we don't start at this, we don't roll it up at a high level. We don't say there's 2 or 3 things. We start with these 106 statements and say, well, where is the opportunity? So let's talk about what do we do? How do we find that opportunity? How do we pinpoint what to work on? Well, again, we go out and talk to those doing the job. But now we have the needs, right? And this time what we ask them is, hey, which needs are important and not well satisfied from your perspective? And we typically would do that through an online survey. to get statistical confidence. You don't have to. I have actually done qualitative interviews for people who want to do it quicker, less expensively. You could get a handful of people to give insight around this. So we're sharing those needs with them. We're asking them to pick their top needs either through a rating system or through identification. But that's only part of the picture. The other part is understanding why that is. What's behind that? What's the root cause? So we typically will then do in-depth interviews afterwards to really understand what's driving that. So we're doing qualitative interviews to gather the needs, map the job and gather the needs. We'll typically do a survey, so that informs the survey to understand with statistical confidence where that opportunity is, and then the deep dive interviews to understand why. And the thing, though, to keep in mind is, and people lose track of this, is you have to get the whole job done to be successful. It's not like you're just trying to do one piece of it, right? But that's a lot to focus on for organizations. So the whole idea of prioritizing is to understand at this point in time, because it is, as I said, a point in time, where are the struggles? What is important to people? What's unsatisfied? So that we can focus our resources. I mean, as product managers, you guys already probably have more to work on than you can ever get done, right? So prioritization is a big deal. And so we use this to help prioritize, and I'll show you what this looks like. Call that a heat map. I know it's small. It's meant to be a visual representation of pain in the market, right? We color code it to show where the most pain is. So that, what's red is obviously the bigger deals. The needs, the red or dark orange, really are the ones that are what we call value drivers. So this is what the customers now that you're trying to add value to have said, this is important, and I'm not satisfied. I'm struggling to do this well. And we also, in our survey, we actually do an analysis to try to correlate that with the Net Promoter Score to say, okay, which ones actually also have a big impact on your Net Promoter. So we call these value drivers. So typically you end up with a handful of these needs, maybe 15 or 20 things that really stand out as the biggest deals to getting this overall job. Again, they have to do the whole job. It's not like a marketing manager can just do one piece of that I walk through. But if you're going to try to add value to them, where do you want to focus your energy and effort? On things that are green or not a big deal, or on the things that are like bright red that really matter?
What did you say that the orange was? Is that a VIP customer? Or?
So these are needs. So each of these boxes are needs. There's actually 106 needs here listed underneath the job. The 13 steps of the job that I walked through previously are kind of spread across the top, and each of the needs here. But so you can see just visually, like a heat map, like you would a weather map. That there's some pain here, but in the developing a campaign, not a lot of pain, and then there's some pain. Over here around managing a lead. So you can even visually see where, if I'm thinking about where to focus my energy and effort in building a product, where do I want to focus that energy? And so each of these boxes is a need. And so the way it works is, let's say you have a product or service already out there, right, for most folks, and you say, well, we do that, and we think we do a really good job of that. Well, that should be the basis of your messaging and positioning, right? The customers are saying this is important. They're struggling with it. You feel like you have a good solution. Tell them about that. So marketers typically love this because a lot of times I tell marketing, don't market our product, and they're like, well, we know we can't market features. We want to market the benefit. Right? But what does that mean? And so here you are. You actually have the needs that this product solves. That's the benefit to them, right? It helps them, determine this or do that, right? So that actually becomes the benefit. And then, you may have some stuff in your roadmap sitting there at some point. And, how do I prioritize roadmap? Usually I notice most organizations is the person with the most gray hair or the biggest stick telling you how to prioritize, right? But I would argue is you should prioritize based on this, right? So if there's some things out there that you don't do that's in your roadmap, pull that up, make that a priority, bring it up. And then, the other aspect is some things maybe you just haven't thought of, or maybe it's just been talked about in the hall, nothing formal. You should now actually focus on how do we do that, because those are a big deal. The company that comes along that does that is going to start winning customers. In fact, this client, that's exactly what happened. They had a product in the market. They weren't doing certain aspects of this well. Someone else came along and really kicked their butt in that, and they were bleeding customers. That's when they came to me. And so we painted this picture for them, and they were like, oh my gosh, like it became so clear of what we need to do. Right? We're going to tell people we do this. We have ideas about that are maybe in the backlog. Let's bring that up, and let's start coming up with new ideas. Now, design sprints, design thinking. Anyone here do that or use that? This is where that comes into play. So I'm trying to give you guys because you learn all these tools and methodologies, like and I like to fit it together. So this stuff is done on the front end, and then you're doing customer development, doing startup, which design thinking is really a way to kind of do that. Like, what is the customer want? How do we? But now instead of being all, I don't know what the customer want, we empathize. I'm trying to figure it out. Sean Van Tyne just talked to everyone in there about design thinking and how people jump into the last box. You're starting with a clear idea of the problem, right? You have confidence in that. Now the question is, how do we best solve that? And I'll talk about in a minute, but that changes the conversation in your organization. You're no longer debating what you should be doing, but it's how do we do it? How do we do it well? And that, in my experience, is what happened when I talk about my product management experience. We had the same common idea of the problem. And so an engineer, a designer, a product person, a tax expert are all focused on that problem, and it really changes how you do it. So I'll walk through this process so that, because I'm kind of alluding to it. So now we know what to focus on. How do we do that? Well, the funny thing is I've actually been talking about this for years. Now I should have written a book and called it Design Thinking. Anyway, but most people will say, let's start with brainstorming. Let's just come up with our ideas, and they throw those ideas up on the wall, and this look familiar probably. And the thing is that this is one of the things I would advocate is unconstrained brainstorming, just coming up with any ideas. When I was into it, someone had the idea of they call it toilet paper taxes. I still to this day remember it. Taxes on toilet paper. What? It doesn't make any sense, right? But it was like, no idea is a bad idea. Throw out your idea, right? And I don't know what to do with that, right? It's really fraught with challenges, right? So again, you don't know which, maybe there's a seed of an idea in there, but you don't know which one to move forward with and how to do that. So again, we throw that out. We say, this 4-step process. So people have been doing design thinking. This should be, right, or design sprints. This is common. And in fact, I did. It's funny. I first made this. I didn't even have a title, and then, Jake and those guys wrote design sprint. And I'm like, dang it! Put that label on the resume. Can't take credit for that, but that's all right. But the goal again is very simple. Now you're doing these quick iterative process to think about what solution, but you have this idea in mind, this product concept. So you start with. You have the problem in mind. So you start with what you've identified here. Right. Here's the problem that we're not making it out. We start with that pain, and then as I mentioned, you get a bunch of experts. Typically, by the way, about 5 to 8 experts. You don't want to really go much less, and you might be missing expertise. Much more, and you get a lot of problems in how you work. So a designer, an engineer, you might have someone who manages the process, like a sprint master. And experts, depending on the problem you're solving. It could be a legal person, it could be a tax person, it might be maybe even an expert in the job, like if someone has done marketing and has that expertise in this case. So. And when you put all these people together and focusing them on that problem, it really changes the conversation, right? So they're no longer debating, as I said, what do we do? One person sales has an idea of what the problem is. If you guys just do this, someone else, the head of your business has an idea, do that, right? Instead, you're like, no, this is the problem we're solving, right? Now let's think about how do we solve this. And what's interesting too is, I experience this, maybe you have too, is that if you put a bunch of people together and focus them on a problem, people are iterating on the problem at that point. So lean startup, to your point, right? You're iterating on how do we best do this. What happens in a lot of organizations who don't do this is that you come up with an idea, and then you go share it with your engineers, and they say, can't do that. That's not really that feasible. But maybe if you did this, and you're like, okay, I'll do that. And then you go share with legal. Legal's no way, we can't do that. That's not. You can't even say that, right? So and you go back, and then and you go through it, and you're just dragging this idea literally through the organization until it's beaten to a bloody pulp, right? It just kills innovation. It kills your desire, right, to actually do this. It really it destroys motivation. So instead, we get the team, we focus on the problem, and then you use tools that you probably have seen. Come up with things like using storyboarding, sketching, analogies. These are all things I do. I think they still work really well. But the thing is that these aren't just analogies for the sake of analogies. They're analogies about how other people have solved a similar problem. So you take that problem and you can extrapolate it maybe more generally. Say, well, okay, giving customers visibility. Who else who's turned their software around and given customers visibility? Oh, FedEx has done that, right, with their tracking. So how do they do that? So you're looking for inspiration, not necessarily to copy a competitor, which is the other thing people do, but how they've solved the problem similar to the problem that your customer has that you want to solve. You see that, so the search becomes much easier because you know what you're aiming for. And then, we generate ideas, of course, and we'll try to converge on those. But now what we're doing is we're converging by, getting feedback from customers. So we're getting out there and talking to customers. So this is where all these other processes I 100% agree with. But we're not defining the problem. Again, I'm going to say that because that is the key. What we're now trying to figure out from the customer is, does this idea, this concept, and we talked in the other session about lower fidelity and stuff, but the idea is, does this concept solve this need in a meaningful way? Why or why not? Right? Not just, hey, what do you think of our idea? Well, if we're a little, maybe I don't like the colors, or I don't like how you laid it out. No, well, you want to know, does this solve this? Why or why not? So now you're iterating around how to solve that problem. And so the power is, we're not guessing what's the good solution. Maybe we don't have the need, and we talk about iterating. I agree, you're iterating, but you're not iterating around what the problem is. You're iterating around what a good solution is, and maybe you decide the outcome is we can't build this solution to solve this problem, but at least now, and I actually was part of a startup, and we did this process. We had the problem defined. We were trying to figure out how to solve it. We got stuck, and so we stopped. We said, we don't know how to do this. There's a bunch of things that we can't control. We're not going to do this, not now, maybe in the future. But that's okay, because guess what? You didn't just waste a bunch of resources and time and years, right, trying to figure this out. We figured it out early on. So we know what a good idea is now. It's one that satisfies the customer need. And I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. I have alluded to these, a couple of companies I've worked with over the years. So First American is the company that actually does the mortgage title. And they increase NPS by 20 points in 6 months. Again, because they actually have a product that's really, a service that's really a necessary evil in the minds of most people, like title insurance and mortgage. Nobody wants that. They want to buy a house. But because we were able to identify those little nuggets, and they did a handful of those things like sending out in the welcome kit who to call when you have a question about X, and a couple of other examples of some actually pretty easy stuff, turning some stuff around, they were actually able to drive NPS significantly. Yes?
No, I'm saying 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes, okay. I'm around here. So TD Bank, struggling with the deposit growth I mentioned. They actually, when we studied the job then of managing day-to-day cash flow, consumers, it was in Canada, but they got this insight. They actually launched a product that became the fastest adopted deposit product in their history. It's a 100-something-year-old company. And then actually Bank of America copied it in the US. They called it Keep the Change. So what was amazing is banks are really not good at understanding customer needs. They're all very much focused on deposit products, credit products. And then, just as an example for positioning, Lexmark, we didn't help invent the inkjet printer. But they're like an also-ran, right, compared to HP and Canon. But what we did do, we studied this, and we realized there was some opportunities to really position. So they actually ended up launching a product that we call it the world's lowest inkjet printer, actually around black ink is really what they did. But this product became one of their most successful products in their entire inkjet line, simply by positioning, by changing. They actually changed, the pricing a little bit, and then they messaged that. They kind of knew it, but they didn't know that was like the biggest deal to do, and that actually changed the game. So just to summarize, this process is pretty powerful, but it can be done quickly. It usually takes, to give you a sense of timing, 2 to 3 weeks to conduct these interviews. Again, you're not doing tons. 5 to 7 is enough. Sean just said rule of 5. I agree with that. After about 5 or 6 interviews, people doing the job, you hear most everything they need to do. And then in about, I say this takes more about 3 to 4 weeks because I typically do a survey to pinpoint and do those deep dive why interviews. You're going to have the understanding what the pain points are. And then doing these design sprints, right? And you can do these as rapidly as you want to. I generally recommend 1 week. And you're trying to get to a point where you have confidence that you can actually, that you have a solution to the problem that's meaningful for your customer, and then spending your money and time building it. So it really is as a result, 6 to 8 weeks. Bless you. You have the literal metaphorical keys to the kingdom. Right? You have a deep understanding of what your customer is trying to get done in terms of the job, right? That it will be stable over time. You now also know what's going to drive their NPS or their satisfaction, and ideally an innovative solution to address it.